about 8 million individual handles from GetIp data. We focused on these 4 feature films that came out in 2013. And we were looking at things of positive, negative views, neutral views, and we were also looking at the sphere of influence of how all these people are connected. One of the things that we found was that there were people actually talking about one of these films that was potentially racist. And getting back to how to educate people on leverage data, there are about 55,000 people talking this film is racist. Wouldn't that be a great tool for an organization to have and feed that back through their PR group and do a different campaign, because you could actually triangulate where these people are, what region they were coming from, to help do some kind of positive press or spin on that, or to see how they're connected with other people that might not see that same view. The other thing that I just, out of just curiosity, I was wondering how far out people were even talking about potentially pirating. Or they're just going to wait for the bootleg, or they're going to wait to go to TMWire or whatever to watch it and stream it. And the point there is that people just don't understand the data, and when I walk into an organization and they say, what's the ROI? I don't think they're really trying to solve the problem. They're just trying to put together a business case to justify their role or their budget. And really, if they try to take a look at the data and try to understand how every release, every little piece of data connected properly with operational data, financial data, Hulu data, what does that mean and the life cycle of the title and the content, and how can we manage this both from a marketing and a distribution perspective, and not just here in the US. I mean, we're talking at a global level now. And when people are saying and they're chatting on these social networks, we got to understand all the different type of vernacular at a global level and how things change.
No, this is an important point, right? So, how many of you guys have heard of Moneyball? Okay, so because it's a very specific story about a very specific organization, we often think of Moneyball as an optimization problem, right? So, we've got a certain budget, we're going to, get these people, fit them into the budget, and we're going to maximize the number of wins. And we're going to try to use metrics that other people don't use, so that we can get a competitive advantage in terms of the scouting. When we talk about predictive analytics, the interesting thing is that what James has just kind of explained, predictive analytics is almost an oxymoron, right? Because if you discover in your snapshot that the numbers, the data, the sentiment is telling you one thing about how customers are responding to the message that you're putting out, and you intervene, you will change the outcome. Right? You can change the outcome. That creates value. I heard both of you talk about that, about this idea of, working with other folks in the business and so on. James, you find out, this question, I don't want you to name the studio or name the title, but your example of 55,000 people talking about a film being racist. You make that discovery, you have some recommendations. How do you then go back and sell that story, which is based on your data that you collected, they didn't collect it, and convince them to change their behavior?
That's a good question, because how do they change their behavior from a communication perspective?
Just any changes, right? Because we know that you're creating value by getting them to make alterations in their operations. So how are you convincing them to do that?
Well, by helping them take a look at their current landscape and how they manage this information, and understanding that it's very, very rapid and real time. I always hate using that, but it's happening now. And if you kind of look at this data from a third party a week from now, 2 weeks from now, if the damage is already done, you could actually understand that there's little ticks and KPIs that you could pick up as you're listening. And if the organization is established correctly from a personnel perspective and manned properly, they could capture that soon enough and know how to funnel that into the right groups. That's how I would help them to redesign and how they do in their business. And not so much just looking at the financials, but looking at the qualitative view of their product, because in the end, it's all about us, what we're saying, and how I'm influencing you, and what's happening out in that chatter that could actually influence the film. So I hope that answered the question.
It does
as far as
somewhat.
helping them redesign their business and what their gaps are within their organization.
No, in fact, it makes me want to ask David, because you were talking about social before, and you know, UTA has a practice in this. So you're working with the studio on a project, you see something that gets your attention and you think requires some intervention.
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
Well, we are sort of in a delicate position because we are talent agents, and there can be a perceived conflict of interest. But we are.
This
show
data
you,
says that our person is terrible.
right. Well, I mean, the truth is, we are sort of completely agnostic to the data. Whatever the data tells us is and we actually have a client in every single film. So we do have sort of an interest in every film too. But it's not like we sort of have more of an interest in one versus another. But I think that, you know, we provide the studios with all the information and the tools that they need to discover these things on their own. And in most cases, they don't, because all the studios say they want to use big data, and they want to film track, and they want to understand the social conversation, but a lot of times, they still have their head in the sand, and they want to know, but they don't want to. And, you know, I get pushback from some studios saying, I might say, you know, at 6 months before release, you know, we've got this little problem, which is appearing, people didn't respond to this in the trailer, or maybe no marketing material has been released at all, but there's a perception out there that it's not going to do well. And the pushback that we get often is, well, what does it matter? I mean, I haven't even started my campaign yet. People haven't seen anything. And turning a blind eye to what people are saying online about your film is really sort of a recipe for disaster. So that's beginning to change, and I think some of the studios are now beginning to realize that, okay, you know, we do need to understand what those perceptions are, because if we're starting our marketing campaign already on a bad foot with this negative sentiment out there, that suddenly means we've got to convert all these negatives to positives. And that's the challenge. If we do see something that's a real sort of glaring problem, and we will bring it to the studio's attention, but ultimately, you know, I might learn that there's a particular scene in a trailer that people don't like. I'm not going to go into the cutting room and cut a new trailer. I can tell them what we see, but ultimately it's up to them to decide what they want to do with that information to adjust their creative. And if they decide not to adjust their creative, and that problem still lingers, we'll continue to report to them that that problem still lingers. I will give you an example. There was one trailer, it was an ensemble, I won't name names, and of the 12 cast members, there was one cast member that people just responded to in a very negative way online. And we reported right back to the studio, and when they released their second trailer, that actor was nowhere to be seen. Not even a card. Name didn't appear anywhere. And suddenly there were no negatives at all in the conversation after that. So that's the kind of actionable intelligence that a studio can use based on the information that we provide them. Oftentimes we'll say, people are not responding to this actor. They'll continue, you know, they may not make any adjustment.
And we have a term for that, folks. It's called the Jar Jar Binks effect. See a question in the back?
Yeah, in the example that both of you two just gave in terms of taking a slice of social media and drawing some conclusion that presenting it to, say, a studio, how do you decide what something, whether it rises to the level of relevance or not? Because 55,000 people in that example of that one film may be crucially important for that one film, and this is something you need to take really seriously, or it's 55,000 people on Twitter, which maybe doesn't mean anything.
That's an outstanding question, and we have what we call soft negatives. So I remember when Paramount released the title of the Star Trek movie as being In Darkness or something like that. A lot of fanboys, for lack of a better word, hated the title. Well, if they're responding to the movie at 250 days before release and saying they hate the title, they're probably going to go see that movie anyway. If they feel passionate enough to actually say that, or actually have an opinion about a title that far out, they're going to go see it anyway. So just by having sort of watched the nuances of conversation over 700 films, we can identify what's a real negative and what's sort of a soft negative. But ultimately, you do want those soft negatives to disappear. And if they don't, and if people are still talking about how bad the name is at 45 days before release, then suddenly you've got a problem. So it's not just saying, okay, I see this little pocket of activity here, but does it linger and does it grow?
Now, this raises a broader question for all of you about what are some of those KPIs that you believe, you know, big data enables and that are meaningful in the entertainment context? What are some of the things the metrics that matter to you and ought to matter to these studios?